It's Monday night in the city.
Yes, it is, Night Watchman.
So Lounge Primetime. We're back again.
Yes, we are. So you know what? This is no longer Soul Lounge Primetime. It is American Slavery Project Radio. Did you not know that?
Yeah, I'm just afraid. Okay, so full disclosure. You know our wives, so you got to tell them that there's nothing going on between us. Like, you're starting to have them on a little too many times.
So far, KK Love has not mentioned that to me.
Okay,
but
good,
yes,
good.
So thank
but
you,
on the
Night
serious
Watch.
thing. Yeah. The reason why they do get to come back so often is because of the great work that they're doing. And we're going to get into that.
We are.
Maybe we should introduce them.
Go ahead.
All right, well, let's give an overview of the show. So
Okay.
we have American Slavery Project back. We have Messeret, Stroman-Wheeler. We have Judy, Tate. And they're here to talk about Black women at the ballot. It's 3 plays and 2 conversations. It's happening only on April 8th. Get all the information up front. I know how to do this. Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
That's right.
That's right.
And in the second part of the show, we'll be talking with Kassandra Frederique from the Drug Policy Alliance. She is going to give us the breakdown on what happened in Albany, the budget battle, legalization, and where is marijuana justice going from here.
Nice.
That's
nice.
Right. That's right.
Full show, huh?
Man, it's action-packed. It's lucky we don't have commercials. Oh, this is a commercial. Okay.
It's a whole social justice
That's
evening.
right. Hey, listen, social justice needs all the commercials it can get because people trying to act like it's going out of style. No, social justice, don't call it a comeback, baby. We've been here for years.
It's a constant march.
That's right.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's talk about social justice through the arts and what you guys do. First of all, Judy Tate is like a one-woman wrecking shop when it comes to creating this dramatic content in all forms.
Causing conversation, not necessarily
That's
controversy,
right. Plays
but conversation.
with a purpose.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's our new
Tag. I'm on this thing here.
Yeah,
you know,
plays with a purpose. Yeah, the American Slavery Project was originally conceived as a theatrical response to revisionism in this country's conversation around enslavement, the Civil War, Jim Crow. We center African American writers who write about the era. We create conversation in the community, and we have educational programs. So we go into schools, we take our work into schools, and we have moved out of the very beginnings of for this series that we're doing a spring reading series focused on the era of Jim Crow. And so this show that we're doing on April 8th is...
you mean the old Jim Crow, not the new Jim Crow.
Yeah, the old Jim.
I get it confused
That's my other
sometimes.
project with my Stargate guys in the summer. So we'll
And
talk about that
we're
another
talk
time.
about Stargate a little bit too, because I think that needs to be mentioned.
Yeah, because, the graduates of that...
Okay, stop and tell them what Stargate is. Let's do that right now.
Stargate Theater Company is a theater company within a theater company of Manhattan Theater Club that is a work readiness project for justice-involved young men. And so about 18 young men work with me all summer to write and rehearse and perform a theater piece that's then put up off-Broadway at City Center Theater for 3 nights.
Wow.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And you'll be happy to know that 5 of the graduates of the Stargate Theater Company are my house management crew and my stage crew.
So how did these young men get involved here?
Unfortunately, they had involvement with the justice system.
Gotcha.
So they either were coming out of Rikers or in a program to avoid, going to a jail or somehow involved with the justice system.
Something alternative to sentencing?
Yes, alternative to sentencing. And, honestly, a lot of times, they're just black and brown boys in New York City. Is what, and that's how you get involved in the justice system. You don't have to have done anything. You may have been swept up, or you may have done anything. We don't ask. By the time they're referred to us, they're ready to, and they're not actors. A lot of they haven't had any experience in theater, but they're really wonderful and beautiful and honest, and they learn a lot. And I'm so excited to have them come on board with Messeret and me. So,
and they've really grown with Judy too. I've attended practically all of the performances that Stargate has had, and you can see the growth of those young men who started, some of them have been with you for like 5 years.
Yeah. Wow.
And you can really see the growth.
Yeah, Denzel Alexander White, who is our house manager this time around, has been with us a long time, and he... so what I'm trying to do, what Messeret and I are trying to do, is we're trying to really grow a theater company that has not just social justice just in terms of content, but in terms of our staffing as well.
Yeah.
Very nice. Very
I
nice.
like that authenticity and integrity.
Totally.
Yes.
So now, on the 2 previous times you guys came on the show telling us about the American Slavery Project. Now, this particular piece, why is this one significant?
This is significant because we're talking about voting. We're talking about black women and the ballot. And so the first 2 short plays are in Pulling the Lever, which I wrote and I'm directing, and it's 3 generations of black women reflecting on the first time that they've voted. And so we talk about voting today, we talk about voting for young people, and we talk about the Children's Crusade, which a lot of young people don't know about. So it's very exciting. And then the second one is a single woman play that's going to be performed by Lynette R. Freeman, who is a regular company member of ours. And it's a woman who works for a very wealthy family 28 hours a day. And, it's basically like modern day enslavement. And so she does a monologue where she's dreaming. She's an undocumented immigrant, and she's dreaming about voting. Wow. And so we're going to have a conversation after that where people reflect on what the vote means to them. Because, it's really important these days for people to be, primed to vote and get out there and exercise their franchise.
So do you think we might be able to get a sample for our listeners?
We will, but I have to tell you about the third play because that's where the sample will come from. The third play is the main one, the kind of reason people are coming, and it takes place in 1913. Yeah, so black people in long skirts. It's very exciting, Edwardian dresses, because we were, and it's a play. A lot of people don't know this, but the 1913 Women's March, right before the inauguration of the president, it's huge. Movies have been made about it, and I was wondering, well, where are the black people? we were trying to vote. Well, guess where we were? We marched in that Women's March, but Alice Paul, who organized it, did not want black women to march, and that's what the play is about. So the piece that you're going to hear that Messeret's about to do for you.
Right.
Well, maybe I should start with Mary Church Terrell. Tell you a little bit about.
Yes. So Messeret plays Mary Church Terrell. Everybody knows her name, but a lot of people don't know about her. So you want to talk about
her? And
then
some people don't know her name.
Oh,
right?
My goodness,
right?
Really?
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
If you think about it, people who don't realize that black women were a part of the suffrage movement, they may not be familiar with her name.
Wow.
Right?
So you'll tell us who she is?
Yeah. So she was an accomplished and very educated woman. Of course, we know she was a part of civil rights. She was an early advocate for women's suffrage. She was an educator. She was an orator. She
How many languages did she speak?
She spoke a lot of languages. She spoke German, French, English, Greek, Latin. Yeah. And she was a charter member for the NAACP. Those are some of the things, right?
She was incredibly accomplished.
So accomplished. She was born in 1863 in Memphis, Tennessee. Both of her parents were former slaves. Both of them became business owners. Her mother was a had her own hair salon.
Wow.
Her father had land. What happened, there was a yellow fever epidemic in Memphis, Tennessee in 1878 and 1879. So people fled from Memphis. He bought the people's land.
Smart man.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So then when people came back, they purchased from him. He became one of the first black millionaires.
Wow.
Right? So that's what she grew up with. And they really wanted to instill in her that education was important. I read her book, A Colored Woman in a White World. And one of the most charming stories, I thought, was her father. Of course, he didn't have a formal education. He was walking down the street one day and he saw this baby doll in the window and he thought, oh, I want to get this for my daughter and take it to her to school. He took it to her to school and the teacher had tied her up to the chair.
What?
And you know, he was thinking, well, why did you do this? And the teacher was like, well, you know, Mary was just very busy. She was a busy child, and they couldn't keep a hold of her. So they tied her up. Well, so from there, he's like, okay, you know what? We've got to get you somewhere where you can get a good education because it's obvious you're not going to get it here. She was sent away to school. And so that's, you know, a part of her education was she was sent away and had to really
To boarding school.
To boarding school, basically. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And spoke many languages. She became an educator. She was invited to speak in Berlin in 1904. She was the only black woman that was invited to speak.
Oh, that was
the
at
International Congress for Women. Exactly.
Yeah.
And she presented
Wow.
in German, French, and English. And of course, they were impressed with her.
Wow.
So she was one of the ones who spoke with Alice Paul being one of the white women who was a part of the suffrage movement to for black women to be a part of the suffrage movement as well.
Wow.
And so
you're going to read a little snippet from Mary,
Yes.
and as she's talking to Alice Paul.
right.
So Alice Paul has come over because the newly formed Deltas have wanted to march in the parade, and Mary's good friend, who was the president of the AKAs. Even though the Deltas had risen up against the AKAs and formed a new sorority, Nellie Quander, a very prominent D.C. woman, teacher, educator, knows everybody in D.C. at the time.
And everybody knows her.
Strategizes with Mary to have a conversation
Yes.
with Alice Paul, who does not want the black women to march.
All right.
Okay.
If you were afraid that our quiet presence in your parade would offend your Southern suffragettes, imagine what effect 22 colored women lying in the streets in front of Miss Milholland will have. The papers will photograph it. The editors will write about it. The sensibilities of those delicate Southern suffragettes will be offended. They will get the vapors. Not just because we walk shoulder to shoulder with them, but because we will be the center of attention. Those white male editors will write about us. I am from Tennessee, and believe me, there is nothing a Southern white woman hates more than the attention given to colored women by white men.
And scene.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And that was written by Judy
Tate. Yes.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So you get a feel for, you know, the time that they lived in and how they addressed each other and the conversations that they had with saying what they wanted to say in a genteel manner.
But tough as nails.
And you felt the shade. You
Right.
felt the shade.
Totally.
Right.
So much shade.
Yes.
And they were successful. You know,
Yeah.
Mary Church Terrell was successful in her. And you know, this is a true story. I didn't make this up. There was I was doing research, and there was an ad in a DC paper that had a interview with Alice Paul, and she said, well, there will be a colored march or a white march or no march at all, but black people will not be marching with white people in this parade. And Mary Church Terrell turned it. Well, spoiler alert. Right.
Nice.
All right. I love their stories, because we be winning.
Yeah. Well,
That's
yes. Go
No,
ahead.
I was going to say one of the things that Judy and I had spoken about was, if you think about it, their parents were slaves. So their purpose, or I think that generation immediately following and thereafter, was very much the purpose of, we've got to uplift our race, and it's about excellence. And so they were always trying to become educated and more educated as they could.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And you have to be twice as educated
Yeah.
in order to be considered half as educated if you're black. But we're always marveling at the stories that we find and the plays that we do. Because people have this idea, the American slavery project. But our story in this country is one of resilience, and
it's rich.
And it's rich and moving forward and championship,
The thing I've found I kind of came to recently is that the biggest tool they've used against us is the eraser.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because every time I keep pulling these stories back, and it's like, wait a minute, what?
That's right.
That happened? We did that? We did that? We did that?
Exactly.
And that's why this work is so important, because we need to unerase those stories.
Absolutely.
We need to tell those stories again, and we need to tell them in our own voice.
Absolutely.
Not in the Driving Miss Daisy voice, not in the conciliation voice. Tell the real Green Book story about the man Jacob Green, who was here in Harlem, who started the Green Book, not some other story about the story.
Right. He was a mailman, right?
Right.
Wasn't he a mailman?
Exactly. I know he wasn't a white man. So, we have to tell our own stories.
Exactly, because unless you center us in the telling of our stories, then they're always going to have, the wrong framing, or the wrong framing. I can't say that. I mean, I like to center African American writers. I do have an Eastern European writer who wrote the single woman piece because
I noticed
it's for
that.
And she's Romanian, and she gets the struggle.
I know she does, because she wouldn't be riding with you if she didn't.
It's true. So we like a little diversity now and then, but I really do like to center. If her point of view wasn't really on target, I wouldn't have asked her to join us. But we are diverse in our own way. But like I say, we like to center African American writers, because unless we're telling our own stories, you're not going to get the true stuff. Oh, you know what else, guys?
What?
Because it's all women.
Yeah.
We got great actresses. We got some fierce people on the stage.
Yeah.
Messeret will tell you about them.
We have. We've got Gabrielle C. Archer, Lynette Freeman.
Hold
which
on,
you guys
back
know
up that.
she's-
What's that last
I know
name?
it. I I asked her wife. I was like, is she related? She's like, no, I don't think so. I don't know. Maybe a cousin of a cousin of a cousin. Y'all might be related.
Papa was a Rolling Stone. That's all I'm saying.
Well, you know how I ended up hiring Gabrielle? Her dad and I were friends because her grandfather and my godfather were Tuskegee Airmen.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
And so when I came to New York, when my godfather moved to New York from Chicago, he moved to New Rochelle where his friend was. Wow. And so when I moved to New York, they said, oh, look up my son, blah, blah, blah. And we were both studying at Stella Adler's studio. And so we became friends. And so now he lives in Italy somewhere, Lee, her dad. But I was like, Gabrielle will be great for this play.
Oh, back up. Lee Archer.
Do you know Lee Archer?
I know he's Tuskegee Airman. My uncle Cecil Curl, was a Tuskegee Airman. He was a mechanic.
Oh, my God.
And
yeah.
after serving the country bravely and fiercely, tried to get a job with Pan Am, but could not.
Oh,
so he ended up
my
being
God.
a postal worker until he retired and died.
Wow.
Yes, so and that was the story of a lot of them on some level. So.
Yeah, because they all didn't continue to be airmen. They
Right.
didn't become pilots.
Correct.
They didn't Right.
And you didn't realize or whatnot that the GI Bill wasn't really created for us.
Oh, right. We were like stomped out of that for
Big time.
At every turn. you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
So Gabrielle has this wonderful history that I kind of share, and so I'm really excited to have her on.
Nice.
And I didn't mean
No,
to
no,
interrupt
that's
you.
okay.
Do your thing.
No. And so the other actresses that we have are Lynette R. Freeman, Montana Lambert Hoover,
She plays Alice Paul.
yes, Celestine Ray, and myself.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Very nice.
So we're very excited because they're all very strong.
Oh,
It's a strong
everybody's
cast.
such a good actor. Oh my God, they're
Yeah.
so good.
And great direction
I was about to
by
ask you,
Judy and
and
Diane Kirksey. Yes.
Yeah.
There we
Oh, yeah.
go.
So I wrote 2 of the 3 plays.
Right.
Saviana Stanescu
Right.
wrote the monologue play,
Yeah.
and I wrote the other 2.
Right.
And I'm directing the 2 shorter plays.
Nice.
And Diane Kirksey Floyd is directing my play, and she's wonderful. And you know her because she's in the TV writing group.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yes,
Everybody
yes.
knows everybody.
Everybody,
Oh.
well.
Try
Ladies and gentlemen
Holla me
out
that
there,
big.
if you're listening to this and you want to join in, remember we are 212-650-6903 Soul Lounge Primetime. Night Watchman, hey,
It's a great show, right?
it really is, man. No wonder we have them on again.
April 8th, you guys.
Yeah,
April
April
8th
8th,
at 7
7
p.m. at National Black Theater, the historic National Black Theater.
Yes,
We're
indeed.
there.
Yep, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram if you miss any of the information that we say tonight.
Or on AmericanSlaveryProject.org.
Correct.
That's right.
Very nice. You know your stuff, Night Watchman.
Putting together these trailers at 3 in the morning, man.
Nice job.
You want to tell them what's happening on Saturday, April 6th? Just
Oh. So on Saturday, April 6th, we've had some very good luck.
Yeah.
We will be 42nd Street because
we have a billboard going up, an electronic billboard.
Oh, wow.
With a
Oh, you fancy now.
We fancy now. You can thank Messeret for that. Messeret's the friendliest person in the world. She shows up at places and everybody's related to her or Ed Wheeler, her husband.
Jedi, I keep trying to tell you.
And so one person connects her to another person, connects her to, which is why she's the social media person, as well as an actor. And anyway, through Messeret's incredible personality and contacts, we ended up meeting a woman whose mission it is to help smaller companies have the same kinds of advantages that really large companies who can afford those giant billboards. So we're going to get a few rounds at a billboard with our cast, a little movie, a little 15-second movie of everybody's faces, our information, and hopefully we're establishing our brand.
Nice, nice.
So we're going to give you, our listening audience, an excuse next week because their show is happening at the same time as our show. So we're going to let you go. But if we don't see you there, you better be listening.
That's right. That's
Prime time.
right. And we won't say that we'll have our show on autopilot. We won't say that now.
No, because,
Okay.
the beat goes on.
You got
So I think we're going to play a little music.
I think, we're going to get a little something popping. What do you think?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
And-
well, I definitely want to know, though, in terms of this, the promo for the upcoming show, NBT is definitely going to be the place that you're going to
Yes, 125th and 5th Avenue, 7 p.m., April 8th.
be. Gotcha. All right.
Well, I got something. All right, there we go.
You know I'll be there, baby, to dry your eyes. Gonna get tired, yeah, of being that second guy. Don't be no fool, baby. You're about to lose your old standby. It's the material things that he's given. Oh, oh, oh. Can you truly say that you have been living? True love, I'm the one who's given. Oh, I don't want to hurt your feelings. You stop on the by. Baby, you're welcome. Stop on by. One day, I might be the one to make you cry. Don't take for granted. I'll always be there. 'Cause there's somebody somewhere, yeah, that can truly need me. It's the material things that he's given. Can you truly say that you have been living?
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
Yeah, stop on by the lounge, huh? Because it's going on.
Is it popping or what?
Yeah, oh yeah, no doubt.
So, Night Watchman, we got another guest up in this
I
bad
am
boy.
pleased to invite into the Soul Lounge Kassandra Frederique, New York director of the Drug Policy Alliance, and she has been knee-deep in the fight for marijuana justice and social equity and a just legalization in New York. Welcome, Kassandra.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us, what's going on in Albany?
So, it changes every day. So, just taking it back a little bit, in December of 2018, Governor Cuomo came out during his announcement where he would preview what he would be focusing on in 2019. He talked about why he needed to regulate marijuana. Mm-hmm. And then in January, when he did his State of the State, which is where he reveals what his priorities would be for the year, he talked about why legalizing marijuana was super important as a criminal justice issue and a key factor of his justice agenda, mm-hmm. and how he wanted to create a cannabis industry that empowered poor communities and not enriched corporations. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important for people to realize that he didn't get that by himself.
I didn't think so.
He didn't get there by himself, you know.
Who may have planted those seeds?
Yeah, well, or beat him across the head, right? It's been like advocates, right? Mm-hmm. So this conversation around cannabis regulation has been born out of this ongoing work that people like Deborah Peterson Small, a black woman, when she was at the New York Civil Liberties Union, wrote a report with Harry Levine of Queens College, which basically looked at the role of policing and its effect on marijuana arrests in New York City. And so one of the things that we got from these reports was that marijuana arrests, New York was the marijuana arrest capital in the country. We were arresting more people for marijuana than anyone else.
Wow.
And so in like the mid 2000s, we were having conversations about how do we actually deal with marijuana arrests. And that a huge linchpin of that was how do we deal with racially biased policing. Right? And so the conversations around stop and frisk and marijuana arrests were percolating throughout New York City, in particular between the years of 2009 and 2013, when we were really fighting for the role of police and reducing the amount of encounters they were having with young people of color. And what we saw was that, Drug Policy Alliance, starting in 2009, started issuing reports on these arrests. And what we found consistently was that they were primarily arresting Black and Latinx people in New York, primarily young people, despite the fact that government data consistently shows that is white people, Black people, Latinx people are all using at the same rates. But if you looked at the age range of people that were primarily those that were targeted, if you looked at data, it would show that young white people were actually using and possessing at higher rates. And even if you went to neighborhoods that were predominantly white, the people that were still most likely to be arrested were Black people. So they were going out. So there was a specific kind of targeting that was happening. And if you've paid attention to how cannabis policy has gone in New York City, you'll see that advocates from Drug Policy Alliance, Vocal New York, Center for New Leadership on Urban Solutions, NICLU, the different defender organizations, we have pushed New York City to a place where, in 2014 they said, we will no longer arrest people for marijuana in plain view, right? That should be a ticket. But what people forget is that when people were throwing de Blasio a big parade about this, the fact of the matter is that marijuana was decriminalized in New York since 1977. It has been 42 years since we removed criminal penalties. That long ago? Yes. And so what the law basically says is that if you have up to 25 grams in your possession, that is not a criminal offense. However, if marijuana is in plain view or if it's burning, that is an arrestable misdemeanor. That's been the law since 1977. That law has never changed. And so when you're looking at the arrest numbers under Dinkins and you're looking at the arrest numbers under Bloomberg, you're seeing like a sea change. And what is the reason for the sea change? And part of that is because of policing, because we decided that, or they decided to do quality of life broken windows policing, where they focused on minor infractions, because in some realm of their world, they thought it would get you to bigger crimes. But what it just showed was that it was net widening, and we were just criminalizing larger groups of people, primarily people of color. And marijuana was caught up in that. So in 2001, you get to a place where you hit 51,000 arrests. And most people don't realize that the seating capacity of Yankee Stadium is 50,287. And in 2010 and 2011, we hit 50,384, 50,687. Like, we were arresting more people than could fit in Yankee Stadium. Wow. And there was no rhyme or reason to it, because when we were going to the courts and interviewing people, we were finding out that, like, people were getting, the police officers were running in the, going in their pockets illegally, or they were asking them to turn out their pockets, or in some cases they were saying they were smoking and they were not. And so we realized that there was like problematic policing happening here. And so much so that the commissioners of NYPD had to issue multiple operation orders to clarify the law to law enforcement. And so you see in New York City, 2014, they say they're no longer going to arrest people for marijuana in plain view. In 2017, we issue another report. 2016, we issue another report. Mayor de Blasio comes for DPA, says our report is like cherry picking the facts. We stand by it. And then later on, they say we're no longer going to arrest people for smoking either, right? Because they realize that unless we take away the tools from law enforcement, this is going to remain. And that whole campaign is really about figuring out how can we deal with the collateral consequences associated with a marijuana arrest. Because oftentimes people think about arrests, but they don't often think about the fact that people are getting that parents are getting drug tested when they're giving birth to their kids, or the fact that marijuana is used as a reason for child removal, right? In an ongoing child investigation. And just with those things, what people don't realize is that, oftentimes people talk about expunging people's records, right? But we miss the fact that if you are accused of child neglect or child abuse, no investigation, no nothing, you get put on a state central registry, and you don't get off that registry until 10 years after your youngest child turns 18. So you stay on that registry for 28 years without any investigation. And that registry bars you from particular areas of work. So home attendants, daycares. It also bars you from being able to do kinship care for someone in your family. So you can't foster another person, right? But nobody thinks about that connection when they think about marijuana arrests. People don't think about the fact that you get kicked out of public housing, right? So like if your son gets arrested for marijuana and then you guys live in NYCHA, either you kick him out the apartment or you all go. And then people miss the fact that Obama just passed an edict for federal housing where you can't smoke cigarettes in your house. That is against the right. So now if we legalize marijuana, people, if you can't smoke cigarettes in there, you definitely can't smoke no weed in there, right? And so we have just created another tier of who can partake and who cannot. People forget the fact that you can't pass background checks in some places and can't get occupational licenses. So we've been building this narrative for nearly a decade about why race needs to be at the center of how we move marijuana reform. And one of the things that we've realized is since we've been working on legalizing cannabis, criminal justice reform has given space to an industry being created.
Yes.
And what is our responsibility to that, to make sure that the industry that has been, if we're trying to move away from a carceral industry, right? With the arrests and the criminalization, and we're creating space for a new industry to come in that's about cannabis, how do we make sure that that industry doesn't exploit our same communities as the carceral industry? And what does that look like? And how can we use this opportunity as an economic development, economic justice or initiative for this reform? And I think one of the things that I think is most powerful about this is that so often criminal justice advocacy is based on this idea of convincing white stakeholders that you should stop locking us up because it costs you too much money. Right?
Yeah.
So we are begging them not based on our humanity or on our dignity, but based on dollars and cents because we know they can't see us for our humanity. So we try to make them see us through the eyes of the green. And so in the conversation around marijuana legalization, how do we flip that on its head and say, we want this criminal justice reform and we want to make money off of it? Right? As opposed to stop arresting us so you can save some money. How is it stop arresting us and let us make money? And how do the money you use to incarcerate us, how do we reinvest that in the communities that you divested in on purpose? And so the conversation that Cuomo brings forward is not one that he came up with himself. It's based on him seeing the writing on the wall that you can't have a situation now in this country where we're talking about cannabis legalization or regulation and not having a conversation about social equity and economic justice and community reinvestment. It is a key element in the 2020 election. You hear Cory Booker talking about it. He's a sponsor of the Marijuana Justice Act, which Drug Policy Alliance proudly helps to sponsor and support. But we can't have a conversation where in New York we legalize cannabis and we do not intentionally, strategically, unapologetically invest in the same communities that were devastated by the criminalization.
So let's go back. Now, you certainly are not old enough to, well, you weren't born at the time of Reefer Madness, okay?
I was not.
Okay. But yet you know its impact. You know what it was designed to do.
I would have said that I wasn't either.
Yes, you were.
No,
you
no.
But
you're older than me, TJ Leroy.
But having said that, okay, tell us about your involvement getting into the particular space, knowing the history of the criminalization of drug policy and its effect on our community. How did you arrive here?
I went to social work school. And before that, I went to the labor school at Cornell.
Okay.
And I learned about union organizing and collective bargaining and what does social change movement work? How does that work? And when I graduated, I went to social work school. And in social work school, you have like a placement where you take, you work a job 3 days a week and you go to classes. And my second year was at Drug Policy Alliance. And it was eye-opening because my family is Caribbean. My parents are from Haiti.
Okay.
They have a very say no to drugs attitude.
Absolutely.
And they still do.
They don't tolerate that
they
stuff.
They don't tolerate
Nope.
it. There's no space for it. And honestly, I think it does a disservice because it doesn't create enough space for there to be dialogue and
Right.
conversation, right? And my parents still to this day probably are not the happiest about me working to regulate marijuana, but they still root for me because I'm working on it, right?
Right.
So my parents are like, you go, girl, let's do it. And then my mom is like, I really, really wish you would. I really, really wish. So like I come home, you know, the marijuana legalization didn't happen in the budget this in the last few days, and I come home and my mom's like, well, what are they scared of? And I was like, Mom, what are you scared of? Right? And she was just like, oh. And I was like, let's talk about this, right? Because like let's actually have the conversation. And most of the things that she was scared of are things that have been proven to be debunked, right? And also like are based in stigma, and this kind of stigma that the man put on us in order for us to police each other.
Correct.
To do their dirty work. And so really figuring out how do we have a broader conversation. And so part of acknowledging of this work and why we want it to be so comprehensive is that this work was imagined by a Black woman, Deborah Peterson Small, right? And recognizing what it means for me to be a Black woman, taking this part of the relay and making sure that her original vision is not only intact but also broadened based on all the things that we know now that we didn't know 10 years ago. And so that's part of like kind of the work that I'm doing and part of the reason that I'm seeing. I'm running this part of the race for someone else to come right after.
So let's talk about where we are in the race now. So the weekend came, the budget came. We didn't get in the budget. Now the push is to get it done before June.
That's right.
Okay.
And so the legislative session in New York is between January and June. And the first part of the session is January to April. And that's when our budget has to be passed. And oftentimes the budget is how do we pay for the roads? How do we pay for schools?
Right.
However, there are some parts of the budget that include social policy that tend to be a little bit more controversial, that give political cover for members of the legislature to be able to say they voted on bail, but if back home they would get pushback on that, they could be like, I didn't vote for bail, I voted for the $2 million for the school, right? So like it gives them political cover. However, after April to June, you got to vote for that bill by itself, right? A standalone bill. And that's the situation we're in now because marijuana was unable to pass through the budget. And so
where are you getting some pushback? Upstate?
So no, I think it's important to recognize that the pushback is like my parents, right? Like it is like older folks or some younger folks that are scared, right? That are operating from a rule book of misinformation. So you have assembly members, like Black assembly members, who are holding rallies and saying this is the worst thing that can ever happen, right? You have Black churches, or you have churches in general, right? Like I'm Catholic, so the New York Conference of Bishops came out and said this is unacceptable. I was like, I'm pretty sure you guys have other things to be worried about, but and I say that as a cradle Catholic, so and a tithing member of St. Charles Borromeo Church on 147.
Right.
So
entitled to say
listen,
your piece, yeah.
Okay, so my first job was in the rectory at St. Gregory the Great Church. Went to Catholic school from 1st to 12th grade. So those are my people, and you got to hold your people accountable. So anybody can get it if I'm a part of the crew. So we have that, and then we also have some parents, right? And I think there are legitimate concerns that can be addressed if we have conversations. And then there are concerns that are based out of hysteria and based out of racism and based out of classism. And those are things that are hard for me to use the time and emotional labor to walk through. And I think part of the thing that we're going to see here, and when we things that we have to be careful of is how do we make sure that a policy that is supposed to disproportionately benefit communities of color, right? Because we were disproportionately adversely impacted. How do we make sure that policy is not dictated by the fears of white suburbia? Right? And this is crucial because drug policy is a master class on how white supremacy dictates policy. And we know that because our drug laws are not based on the pharmacology of the drug, they're based on the face of the perceived dominant user population. And that major thesis was written by a black man named Troy Duster, written in a book that was published in 1970, a year before Richard Nixon declared the war on drugs. And he already had 100 years of evidence that went to show that these drug laws are not based in science, but actually based in the root cause of fear, stigma, racism, xenophobia, and sexism. And so the moment that we're in right now, as we push for legalization, as we see amendments coming in and out, as we see people saying, if you're going to do this, you need to provide this. We need to figure out how do we hold the line that this is actually being dictated by the people most impacted and not the people that have the most fear about the communities most impacted, right? And that is going to be a very hard balance, right? Because in the legislature, though we have one of the most diverse legislatures, if all the black and Latino people voted for the bills, we couldn't pass it. Right? We need white suburbia to recognize this. But, some of the things that I've heard is like, part of the things that we're fighting for is like the money that is generated needs to be reinvested in communities most impacted.
Correct.
And we have legislators that are saying things like, well, my community deserves something. And I'm like, your community had 3 arrests. This community over here had 50,000. Why do you think that you are entitled to the same amount of resources
That's right.
when you didn't have that foot
that
on your
impact.
neck?
That's
right?
right.
And so we actually have to have this larger conversation about what does reparative justice look like. And so how do we use marijuana as a tool to build out the container to figure out how do we repair harm and how do we reinvest? Because the very same conversation we're having around cannabis regulation is the very same conversation we need to be having around the overdose crisis, because we have had an overdose crisis in New York for a very long time, and it has impacted certain communities, but it has never marshaled the kind of resources that are now in place. And to be honest, I'm very glad that there's been a marshaling of resources. I just want to make sure everyone has access to those resources. And I want us to be very clear that in the 1970s, when the heroin crisis was popping off in New York City,
Nobody was looking. That's right.
No, people were looking, and they created an Office of Special Narcotics Prosecution.
Okay.
That was just about the heroin crisis, as opposed to right now where we have diversion programs and courts that are based on not incarcerating people and giving them access to treatment, as opposed to incarcerating them, because now you have white, suburban, and rural places saying we can't arrest our way out of this problem. But these will be the same people saying you can't close our prisons because those are jobs.
Right. So let me ask you this. We got 2 months in front of us, April, May, June. How should people be focusing their attention now?
So I think one of the biggest things that folks need to do is look up who their elected official is.
Okay.
And then look up the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act that is being sponsored by Crystal Peoples-Stokes and Liz Kruger.
Okay.
And then see if your legislator is on it. If they are not on it, you need to ask them why. And you need to ask them why consistently. You need to visit them and ask them why. And they need to get on the bill. Because we can get this done in June, but we need people power. And I say that very specifically because the moneyed interests are here in New York. And they are visiting these elected officials every single day.
And
they are writing checks.
Let's call it for what it is. This is New York. There's going to be some legalization coming, and it's not coming for us. It's coming for the money.
That's
so we know this, but we have to make sure that we get the right one, and we have to hold the line on this. And we have to
write the line and hold the line.
Right, exactly.
Our previous guest had mentioned MM, and you gave an eye roll. I won't mention their name, but you know who I'm talking about. So are they one of the large corporations that is lobbying?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
10 licensees now. I understand there's another 5 being approved. There are none of color. And there are no dispensaries in our neighborhoods, with the exception there's
the Bronx.
There's one in the Bronx for the entire Bronx, 3 million people. There's one dispensary, and there are none anywhere in our communities. So I think the other thing that has to be talked about, and I hope we can get this done in the next 2 months, is fixing the medical program so we actually have a real medical program where real people in our neighborhoods can not only be able to have access, but to have more of an engagement. Because I don't want to have to wait. There should be no reason why I should have to wait before a California or Colorado company decides it's profitable to put a dispensary in our neighborhood. And then are they going to stock the strains that are going to meet our health challenges? We need something like being able to do our own co-ops where we can control actually what is being developed, because the simple fact is that we're only at the beginning of what medical cannabis can do.
See, that's the thing, Night Watchman. I'm going to give you some proppies on that, because you definitely said the different strains, and people don't know. They just think cannabis is cannabis. No, and it's not. Especially when we're talking about a medical use. As a matter of fact, when we had Dr. Stephen Robinson on,
yes, they're the cannabinoids. There's a couple things that people should Google. Google cannabinoids and Google the endocannabinoid system, which is a system that all of us actually have in our bodies, and cannabinoids help us basically adjust, and makes the body self-heal. We have cannabinoid receptors all through our body. THC is one cannabinoid, CBD is another, but there are hundreds of them. And because of the Schedule 1 prohibitions, there's been no research for the last 85 years.
Wow.
So they kind of stumbled on CBD, but that's one of hundreds.
Yeah.
We need to be involved in the process of having our own scientists help develop our own strains for our own people to solve our own health problems. And we need as much medical social equity as we do business social equity.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about centering our health, right? And like, how do we make sure that we have access? And one of the hard things about the medical cannabis program in New York is that it's not affordable. And it's not accessible because of the geography. And I think the point that you made about co-ops is exactly right. And one of the things that we're fighting for the adult use market is that we have worker co-ops, we have micro licenses, and that we actually invest in building sustainable and economical farms.
Back up for a second. So, not economical. So, in other words, my copay, I got anxiety. I can't use that?
No, insurance doesn't cover it yet.
Night Watchman?
Hey, not my fault. My radio partner thinks I'm responsible for everything.
Oh, Lord.
So I think we're about time. We're going to have to start wrapping up. I want to thank all of our guests here. Messeret, Stroman-Wheeler, Judy, Tate, Kassandra Frederique. It's always great for us. We love having powerful, passionate, intelligent people on our show, and having all of you on at the same time just makes us feel good all over.
Well, DJ Aton basically said getting ready for a Harlem dance party.
All right.
Said that this is a serious show. He's digging it. So, ladies, parting words. Start out with you, Kassandra.
If we knew everything they took from us, everything they extracted from us, we would not compromise for anything. Marijuana justice is what we deserve, and that it shouldn't just end with cannabis, that we actually have to get full reparations for what the drug war has wrought in our communities.
Excellent. Miss Tate.
Same goes for me. It's always the same story in different clothing, and that it seems like we're miles apart in what we do, but we're not at all.
No, not at all.
And I was just coming up with many play ideas. As
I knew this. I knew this already. I know that's right. So Kassandra, you will be the basis. Okay, just know that.
Well,
okay?
we've got her information now, so we'll be in touch with her.
Messeret, any last words?
Well, my last words will be to invite your listeners again to come to our performance next Monday, April 7th.
April
8th at 7 p.m. I was thinking to myself that you guys will be here. You won't be able to come, but your wives will be able to join us.
Okay.
Yeah.
KK Love, if you're listening.
Yep. So, don't I get some music on this one, bro?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
you absolutely do. And
All
so,
right.
we can go out with a nice little bang there. All right?